Hi everyone. I want to cover the material from chapters 11 and 12 from the book. And this covers a really important subject in Android development or any type of app development for that matter, and that is using a database. So up until this point, we've actually worked with some data in our apps, such as drinks or exercises, stuff like that. But we've just hard coded the actual data right into a Java class, which is not what we want. We really want our data to be stored in a database. And so this is a really practical example here. I didn't like the way the book laid it out. I thought it was really unorganized, the code, so I wanted to show you what I think is a better way to do it, and hopefully this will save you a lot of time because it takes a long time to go through those chapters and read everything and then type in the code too. So I'm going to try and make this a really quick video. Well, I don't know how quick it's going to be, but instead of typing in the code as we go, I've already got it typed out, and I'll try and show you everything here as we go. So I want you to follow along and create these classes with me. I've actually just created a new project, and you can call it SQLite Example. That's what I've called it right here. And you can just use all the default settings. I think the minimum API that you use when you set up your application, it doesn't really matter. I think you're safe with something like 16 or 17. It should work on any of those. This code's been around Android for quite a while, so this is nothing new. But anyways, we are going to do something similar to what we did in the other sample apps from the book. And we are going to create a model class. So we do this to kind of model our data. We created a drink class and gave it some properties, and we did that with a few other projects too. Exercises, I can't remember the other ones that we've done so far. But what I have here is just I'm working with items. That's what this sample app is going to be about, which is very generic. So if we were going to make an app that like handled student records, then we might make a Java model class called student. But instead, I'm going real generic and real simple, and I say this app is going to be working with items here. So I created a class called item, and to do that, you just go to your Java directory, right-click on it, and choose new Java class. And then you'll be prompted with, so it's asking me the directory structure. You want to put it in this main / Java folder. That's fine. And then I'm going to hit OK here. And then I would go ahead and type in item, but I've already done that. You can go ahead and do it. So it would be something like that. I'm just going to cancel this, but you can click OK. And here we go. Here's our item class. So I'm going to say that my item has two properties that I care about. One is an ID, and one is a name. Like I said, if you were building an app that worked with something else like students or pizza orders or whatever, you might give it different properties. So a student class might have a first name and a last name, and a student ID, a social security number, and those might be all the kinds of properties that you'd put in a student class. But my item class just has a name and an ID. Those are the two instance variables. And I also have a constructor that I created here just so that I can quickly pass in the ID and name of my item right into the constructor, so I don't have to, I can do that all in one line of code. So that's what this is here. It's just an overloaded constructor here that allows me to pass in an ID and a name, and then that way I can instantiate an item and give it its properties all in one line. I don't have to instantiate it in one line and then use the setter methods to set the ID and name. So I can just pass those right into the constructor here. And then the other parts of this class here are the getters and setters. So I've got my get ID here, my set ID here. I'm sorry, here's my get ID. And then here is my set ID right here. And same with name, get name and set name. Now there's one other method in here, and the book mentions this, but doesn't, I don't think, if I remember correctly, it doesn't actually really explain this, and that is a toString method down here at the bottom. So the reason why we override this toString method, remember going back to Java basics, toString is a method of the object class. The object class is the mother of all classes. It's the all classes extend object. an object has a toString method that we are overriding here. And by default, that toString method just returns like a memory address of this object. So we're going to override it and change it so that it actually gives us what's known as a string representation of our object. So we're basically going to dump out the variables, just return the variables, which are name and ID. Now, Android uses this toString method in its adapters. It calls toString. So if you have an adapter that's an array list of item objects, when the adapter loads the data into, say, for example, a list view, it will call the toString to populate each label in the list view unless you override it with some of your own custom behavior. So this toString method is important when you're using adapters and pumping data into your components such as list views or whatever else, spinners, whatever else. So it's important to override this toString method, and unless you customize your adapter, this is what you'll see inside each list item in a list view. So it would return the name and then in parentheses the ID right here. All right, that's the whole item class right there. Pretty straightforward, I think. So that's our model. That's what we've modeled what our data looks like for this app in that item class. Another really important class here, actually there's two other important classes that we're going to deal with, and the next one I want to talk about is called the SQLite helper class. We are going to be using a SQLite database, and the book explains, if you want to read more about it, the book explains why it's such a good choice for Android development, but it's basically a lightweight database that is built into the Android operating system. So there's all these classes that are available for us to extend, and we can get all this functionality of interacting with these SQLite databases. If you're going to interact with a database in your app, you need to extend the SQLite helper class. So I'm going to crack open that class right now, and I've called it my SQLite helper. So we'll just open that up real quick here, and let's see, what do we have going on here? So you can see here that it extends SQLite Open Helper, and that is a class that allows you to create a database and open it up so that you can interact with it. So you got to have a helper if you want to interact with a SQLite database. All right, so you can see here it is, extends SQLite Open Helper, and I've named it my SQLite helper or SQLite. I kind of use those terms interchangeably. And then I've got some instance variables here, and they're all static and final here in this case. But this first one, we've seen this before. This is a tag that I use for logging. So you can set up a private static final string and call it tag, all caps. And then what you can do is, what I have here is just kind of a way to get the class name through code. But if you want to, you can just simply hard code your class name like this here, my SQLite, whoops, helper. Okay, that's just fine like that. Now we also need a static final string variable for our database name. So this is going to be the name of our database. Oops, I forgot a semicolon up here. So this is going to be the actual name of our database file, and I'm just calling it test.db. You can call it whatever you want, .db, but just make sure you, whatever you want to call for your database name, just assign its value to this database underscore name constant. And then we do need another piece of data right here, and that's the version of our database. And this is important because when you want to upgrade your database, let's say you create version 1 of your app, and it gets distributed to a bunch of users out there on the internet or through the internet, and then eventually you want to make some updates to your database. What you would do is you would bump this database version number up by 1, and then when the app gets launched, and we start to use this my SQLite helper class, it will notice that the version number has changed, and then there's a method that you can use to update your database, like add new columns to your database or whatever changes you want to make. But this is important because if you release version 1 and a whole bunch of people are using it, and then you update your app to version 2 and you've changed the database, you don't want to just go and wipe out what was already there when your users upgrade to the newest version of your app. You want to be very careful to make changes to your database so that your end users don't lose any data that they put in there before. And as I'm thinking about it right now, I realize that some of you have never really worked with a database before. So some of this code or some of these concepts are going to be all brand new for you, but I think you'll be able to follow along. So I'm going to walk you through this, and I think it's okay if you don't understand the SQL statements that we're going to use. The SQL statements are the commands that we use to retrieve data from the database or update data from the database, stuff like that. So anyways, we've got our tag, database name, and database version here. And then we have to overload this constructor here. This is required code when you're extending a SQLite Open Helper class. So what you have to do here is overload this constructor that just takes a context. Now we've seen context before quite a bit, and that's basically just going to be the activity that uses this helper class. So that's what we'll pass into this constructor. But what we want to do right away is call the super constructor and then pass in our database name and database version right here. So this is, like I said, this is required code right here. Lines 14, 15, and 17. I've got a comment in there, but anyways, so notice calling the super constructor, and we're passing in our context. So that will be our activity that's using this helper class. Our database name here, I can't remember what this parameter is for, but you can just leave it to null right now, and then finally our database version. All right, now what's going to happen when this constructor gets called, this class will actually check to see if the database has been created yet or not. And if it has not yet been created, so if it doesn't find this file in the folder where all the application files go for this app, it will create your database, and it will call this onCreate will get called, and a database file will get created, and at that point we need to populate our database with one or more tables, and that's what's going on here. So let's see here. I've actually, now what I've got here is I've got my code to create my table in another class, and we'll talk about that in just a second here. So that's the other class that I wanted to talk to you about. So anyways, the SQL code that will create the table, our table of items, we'll look at that in just a minute here, but all I need to do is call db execute SQL and pass in that command. So I wanted to say here that there is this database object that gets created for us when we use this helper class, and it's an instance of SQLite database, and if we want to run commands against our database, we could call the execute SQL commands and then pass in the actual commands right here. Now there is one more method that you have to create in your helper class, and that's this onUpgrade method. So let's see here, and we're not going to worry about this too much, so I think for now you can just leave this blank. I think that's safe to do right now. We're going to pretend that we're not going to worry about upgrading our app to a new version, so you can just leave this as an empty method. So I'm just going to get rid of all this code right here and just leave it empty. I think that should work. Actually, what I'm going to do is just comment it out. All right, so that's all the code that we need for our helper class for now. Hopefully you're all able to see that and get it in, but it's basically our static final variables here. Then we have to provide a constructor that takes this context parameter, and then we call up to the superclass with that, passing some of our variables into it. And then we have our onCreate statement. So now you can go ahead and type this in, and you'll get some errors because we haven't yet created this class yet. Or if you want, you can come back to this after we create the other class and then fill it in. But this is what the code is going to look like in the end. But you will have some errors right now only because we don't have this other class created yet. Okay, and then finally on upgrade, we'll just leave that empty. So I've commented everything out of there. All right, that does it for our SQLite helper class. And I'm going to show you one other class. Now, whenever you're building these apps, you have a model class over here. Our app deals with these items, and so here's our item model class here. And then what you want to do too is create a separate class called whatever your model is, data access. So this is just simply a class that holds properties for us. But this item data access class is going to be the class that actually fetches the data from the database for us, or inserts the data into the database for us, or makes updates for us. So this is why I decided to show you my way of doing this rather than the book's, because the book doesn't use this class, this approach, this data access class. And I think it's a nice thing to do because it keeps all your code in one place. So the book is spreading all this code that this class does throughout different places of the project, and I didn't like that. I like it better when you keep everything kind of centralized. And all of my activities that need to interact with the database can use this item data access class. Okay, let's take a look at this one. This is kind of a big one, and there's a lot going on in here, but we'll take it step by step, hopefully. So here it is, item data access. You can see it's got a couple of instance variables, well, quite a few actually. You can just go ahead and create all of these. So these are our member variables for this class. We've got a SQLite database instance, and it's going to get that from our helper. And we also have to refer to our helper that we created. So notice the data type here is my SQLite helper. That's the class that we were just looking at. So this data access class is going to use that to interact with the database. And let's see, I've also got my tag here that we can use for logging. And then the other thing that you want to do is you want to make static final constants for some key pieces of information for your database. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a table in our database called items. So the items table is going to keep track of all of our items for us. So I've got a public static final string table underscore name. That's over here. And so the table name is going to be items. And then you also want to have final constants for each column in that table. Now, I hope I'm not losing a lot of you who haven't worked with databases before, but like I said, hopefully you can just type in this code and follow along with it. And I'll show you something at the end of the video that might help you visualize all this stuff. So this table, this items table here, is only going to have two columns in it. It's going to have an ID column. Now, most tables in many databases have an ID column, and it's just simply a number that is a unique identifier for each row in the table. So we've got one here, and notice, I want you to pay attention here that it's got the value that we're giving it here is underscore ID. Now, Android it expects your ID columns to be called underscore ID. So that'll make things easier for us because going back to those adapters, sometimes depending on the adapter that you're using, Android will look for a record with an ID field in it. And this is a very simple table, so all we have is an ID column and an item name column. So here's that other public static final string column item name, and then we'll give that, the column name is actually going to be item name here. All right, so we don't necessarily have to create variables for these. We could hard code these everywhere we wanted to use them, but The problem with that is that if you need to make a change, then you have to go find all the places in your code that need to be updated. The nice thing about using these variables right here is if we decided that we needed to change a column name somewhere, all I have to do is change it right here. And then all the places in my code should be referring to the variable, and it shouldn't be some hard-coded string. So it's nice for making changes. And the other thing too is that it kind of documents what your table is set up like just by looking at this class here. It helps me to see that I've got the table name right here and then my two column names right here. It helps me to understand what's going on in the class when I look at the code. Okay, now moving along, I've got another constant here. It's spread out over a few lines, but it's just a string called table create. And now this string is going to be the SQL command that creates our table, our items table in our database for us. So this code, so I'm talking about these lines right here, lines 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. Now this is spread out over a few lines, but it's really only one line of code. So what this is I think we've used the string format class before, but what it is you can type in a whole big string for your first parameter. So that's right here. And then you can have as many other parameters as you want after that first parameter. And you can see the other parameters right here. And what it does is it looks at the first parameter, and we've got these placeholders here. So I've got, it says create table, and then it's got this placeholder, and what it's going to do is, in this case, this is the first placeholder, so it's going to look for the first parameter after this one, which is going to insert the table name right here. And then as we move along, we've got the next placeholder here, so that's going to correspond to this parameter down here. And then finally we've got one more parameter way over here, and that corresponds to this parameter here. So what we're doing is we're using our variables in our SQL command that creates the table for us. So what this is going to end up saying here, it's going to be, I'm just going to read it, it's going to be create table items and then space and an opening parentheses, and then it's going to have underscore ID as an integer, that's the data type in the table, and it's going to be the primary key. Now don't worry about this if you don't understand what a primary key is, you can just kind of ignore this. And same with auto increment. All that means is that when we insert a new item into our table, if it doesn't have an ID, just assign it the newest one that's available. So your IDs, as you insert items into the table, they're just going to sequentially be updated or set to starting with 1, and then the next item that we insert into the table is going to be a 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And then right here, it's going to have our item underscore name in place of this placeholder here, and the data type of that in the database is a text. So that's just like for string data. All right, so this is all one big string when we're done with it, but we use the string.format method to set it all up. Now you don't actually have to include this one because this would go into that upgrade method back in our SQLite helper class. But since we're going to leave that blank, you don't need this here, so you can omit this line if you want. And then what we've got here is an overloaded constructor. So this is going to make it easy for us to use this item data access class from our main activity. So what we're going to do is we're first going to instantiate our MySQL helper, and then we're going to pass that MySQL helper into the constructor of this class. So we first create our helper, and then we initialize this class, the item data access class, and we pass in our database helper right into the constructor for this class. So, and then you can see here is where we're assigning values to some of the variables that we saw up above. So we're saying that here's our helper class. This is the MySQLite helper, and then we're actually using the helper to get the database. So this is the second variable right down here is the actual database itself, and it's kind of wrapped up inside of our helper right here. as a property of it. Okay, so these two lines, 32 and 33, correspond with these two variables that we talked about up here on lines 12 and 13. All right, moving along. So we've covered all the details for setting up your database and getting it created and creating our table. We could create as many tables in this database as we wanted to, and we would have a data access class for each table then. So in this case, our database only consists of one table, a table called items. That's why we have one data access here class, just an item data access class. All right, now we need to put the code in this data access class that actually interacts with the database, with the table that we're dealing with. So to be able to insert items into the table, we can do it like this. So that's these lines of code, 36 through 42 here. So you can see that I've got a method name. It's called insert item. It takes an item as a parameter, and that is just this item class over here that we talked about first. So we pass one of those into this method, and what will happen here is, now you don't have to understand all this code here, but what this is going to do is kind of create a hash map right here. And in the hash map, the key is going to be the column that we want to assign value to. So we're just going to use our constant from up above, column underscore item name. That's going to tell the code which column in our database we want to update, and the second parameter here is the value that we want to set. So we're simply going to take that out of our item class. We're just going to call get name on it. Okay. Now, as I think of this, some of this code may make more sense after you get everything up and running and kind of look at it all. But anyways, so what we do is we'll take an item that we create from our main activity, pass it into this method here, and then these lines of code will actually insert it into our table. So you can go ahead and, like I said, this content values is kind of like a hash map of key value pairs, and the key is the column name that you want to insert data into, and the value, the second parameter here in this put method, is the value that we want to insert into that column. And then we run this method against the database itself. So we say database.insert, and remember, database is one of our variables that we initialized up here in the constructor. So we call the insert method there, and then we specify the table that we want to insert into. And then I can't remember what the second parameter is, but we don't need to worry about it. But the third parameter is that hash map looking thing, which is called the content values, but it's just full of key value pairs. So this will actually add a row to our database. And then what we do, like I was telling you, if we're inserting a new item into our items table, the database will assign it an ID, and then after the insert is complete, if everything works like we wanted it to, the return value of this database insert call will be the ID that the database assigned to that row. So we get that ID back, and then what we want to do is set the ID on our item class that got passed in here, and then we've got a complete item right here. So it's got its name saved in the database, and the database gave us its row ID back. And so we just take that row ID and set it on the item, and then we can return the item itself right here. And you can, so we're passing an item in, we're adding some data to it, we're adding the ID to it, and then we're returning it. All right, so that's how you would insert rows into your database table. Now, one more method in here. The other thing that we want to be able to do is to retrieve all of our items from the items table. So starting on line 44, that's what this method does right here. This will retrieve all items from the items table for us. So you can see that right here, here's the name of the method, get all items, and you can see that its return type is an array list of items. So it's going to return an array list of item objects. So when we step into the code here, we see that we initialize an array list and we give it the data type of item. So we call our constructor for array list here. And then we have to create our SQL command that we want to run that's going to select the data for us. And that's what this line does right here. And now again, we're using that string format method again. And so we're going to be inserting placeholders into our string here. So here's the format method, and then this is actually going to be the SQL command that we run. So if we look at this, it says select, and then our first placeholder, and then column ID, and then our second placeholder is going to be column item name, and then our third placeholder here is going to be the table name. So what this is going to read out as after the placeholders get replaced with their real values is it's going to be select underscore ID item underscore name from items. So that's what that string is going to resolve to. And that is our SQL query to select all the rows out of that table. Like I said, I really don't know if any of you have worked with databases before or not. So if you don't understand this, don't worry too much about it, but just know that this select statement selects all of our rows from our table. So once we've built that command, we need to run it. So what we do is we take our database object and call raw query here. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but I think this is probably the easiest one. So a raw query means we just pass in our query statement. So these select statements are also known as query statements. So we go ahead and pass that right into that query method of the database. And what we get back is a special kind of class called cursors. And cursors are basically classes that wrap up result sets from your database. So a cursor, what it does is it'll allow us to move through all the rows that got returned, and what we can do is, as we loop through the rows, we can create item objects and stuff each item into our array list. And then once we're done moving all the rows into item objects, then we can return our array list. So the first thing you have to do here is you have to make sure the cursor is on its first row. So this is just kind of a precaution here. So you call, I've named my cursor C right here. And notice that this raw query returns a cursor when that method is done. That's right here. So then I take my cursor and I make sure it's on the first row, and then I loop through it. So we're going to go while we haven't gone past the last row, keep looping. That's what this is saying right here. So here's another method we can call on a cursor to see where the cursor is at as far as what row it's pointing to. So while we haven't reached the last one, keep looping, and then what we're going to do is create a brand new item. And then here's where we call our constructor that we created in our item class right here, so we can just pass in our values. Now, this is a little bit tricky, but you have to know the order that your rows are, the order of the columns for each row. So I know from looking at the select statement right here that the first column that I'm retrieving is the ID, and then the second column that I'm retrieving is the item name. So what you can do is take the cursor and call, we know that the ID is, the data type is long. In the database we called it an integer, but when we use it in Java we want to convert it to a long. And this is it's indexed just like arrays, so it starts with 0. So the first column in each row is going to be 0, and that's going to correspond to the first column from our select statement, which is ID. And then the second column in that row is going to be the item name right here. So we take the ID and the name and pass both of those into our item constructor here. So this is where we're populating our item data models. And then we simply take that item, which I've called I right here, and we add it to our items array list. And then I forgot to do this once, and it resulted in an infinite loop, and it took me a super long time to troubleshoot the problem. But don't forget to call this move to next right here, because if you don't do this, then your while statement will never terminate. So you got to make sure that when you're done processing one row that you call this move to next method on the cursor. Okay, so that's about it. Then when we're done looping through it, we want to close the cursor because it does take up some resources. So you want to make sure you close it and free those resources. And then the last thing that we do here is we return our array list of items right here. All right. Hopefully you've been able to follow along so far. And the only thing I have left to show you is how to use these three classes. So we created an item model object that just had an ID property and a name property. And then I showed you the SQLite helper class. And that class is meant to open the database or create it if it hasn't been created. But that's basically used to create a connection to our database. And then, just to recap, our item data access class has all the code for creating the table and for inserting data and retrieving data. So that's kind of how these parts all work together. And remember that when we instantiate this item data access class, we actually pass in our helper class into it. And that kind of makes sense because the helper class is the connection to the database. So our data access class needs to have some way to connect to the database, and it does it through the helper class. All right, so there's just one class left here, and that is the main activity. Before I show you that, I think I'll show you the layout file so you can get that going. So I'm going to pause it just for a second. Okay, so I'm going to open up the activity_main layout file, and here it is right here. And you can notice the first thing that I did is I'm not using a relative layout. I changed it to a linear layout. Just for me, those are a lot easier to work with, so I decided to use that. So you're going to want to change that here and at the closing tag. So make sure that's a linear layout down here as well. And the other thing that you have to do is you'll want to, if you change it to a linear layout rather than the default, which is a relative layout, you also want to specify an orientation, and make it vertical here. Okay, so you can copy all these properties if you want, and actually, yeah. So that's our root view in this layout. That's our linear layout, and then we've got a text box or an edit text right here, and you can copy these properties too. So how this is going to work, let me see if I can switch to design view and see if this will show you. This might make a little more sense here. So by the way, some of you were having problems getting your design view to work, and if you change your API from 22 to 21, that might help. Well, I guess I didn't need to in this case. One of my updates must have fixed this, but there was a bug. There was a bug with one of the versions of Android when you were this design mode wasn't working. So anyways, here's what our view is going to look like. So I've got a text box right up here. So we're going to enter an item name into here, and then once you press this button right here, it's actually going to insert the item into the database for us, and then it's going to populate the list view down here with all the items from the database. So that's basically all there is to it. There's our text box for entering item names here. And then we press the Add Item button, and then we will take that item name and squirt it into an item object, and we're going to leave the ID at its default, which is going to be 0. And then we insert that item into the database, and at that point the database is going to give us an ID back, and then we'll have a complete item at that point, and then we can populate our list view for of all the items down below. But let me go back to the code here for this layout so you can copy it. Okay, so here's our text box where we enter the item name. You can copy those if you want. And then we've got a button with an ID of button 1, and I've got the layout width of match parent and wrap content for the height. And then I'm just hard coding the label in, which is kind of a no-no. We should be using our string resources for that. And then finally here you can see that I've got an on-click attribute set up, and so that's going to call the add new method that we're about to create in our main activity. And then finally, the last item, the last view in this layout is our list view. So the list view has an ID of list view 1 right here, and I just got the layout width and layout height set to match parent. That's it. All right, that's all the code for the activity class. And let's check out the code for the main activity then. All right, here it is. So let's see, where do we start here? Okay, main activity, you can see it extends activity. Now, if you haven't noticed, by default, when you create an app, it extends like some action bar activity. I just changed it to activity here, and there doesn't seem to be any problem with doing that. So I think you could leave it as an action bar activity if you wanted to. I don't think it really matters, but anyways, I have it set up as an activity here. And so I've got my instance variables here. I've got my tag for logging. So hopefully you guys know what that's all about from my logging video. Then I'm going to have an instance of my DB helper available, and also my data access class, which I've called DA. And then we're going to need to get a handle on that list view that's in our layout. And I'm also going to have an array list of items that we'll be working with here. So those are our member variables. And then we'll move on to the onCreate statement right here. Now this should be all familiar to you, these first few lines. So we call the super method first, and then we call set content view to specify which layout this activity is using. Now these two lines of code should be there already for you. Then I've got some comments here, but we can ignore those. And then so right here, I'm initializing my helper class, which is that my SQLite helper. And remember that for that constructor, we had to pass in a context. And the context is this activity. So I can't remember if we've talked about this before, but we pass context around a lot. And that's so that the Android operating system knows what activities are using these services. So if you look at the inheritance hierarchy, a context is a superclass of activity. So an activity is a context. So that's why we'll see we see this a lot where we have to pass a context around. And so I've initialized my database helper right here, and I need that to pass into my constructor for my data access class. So right here, I am calling the constructor for the data access class and passing in our helper, our database helper. So that allows the data access class to have a connection to the database. And then I'm getting a handle on the list view from our layout file right here. And then I'm making my first call to a method of our data access class, and I'm saying DA, that's our data access class, get all items. So if you remember, that retrieves all the items from our items table in the database. Now, when you first run this app for the very first time, obviously there's nothing in there, so it will return an empty array list. And anyways, that's okay though, nothing will break. What we need to do then is create an adapter so that we can pump the data into our list view through the adapter. So that's what adapters are for. They're the glue between a set of data and some sort of view that you're using in one of your layouts. So here's the code for the array adapter. And let's see here. This looks, so let me expand this. So that was a little bit confusing there. Android Studio likes to collapse your code sometimes, but this is what you should see here. So array adapter, and it's going to be an adapter full of item objects, and we're going to call it adapter. And then here's the constructor. So it's array adapter, and it's an adapter. We have to specify that it's an item. It's going to be an array of item objects. And then we have to pass in the context, so we pass in this here. And then the second parameter is going to be what view do we want to use for each row in our list. So this is actually a view that comes built into Android. So we could create our own custom view if we wanted to, but this one built into Android works for us. You might want to create your own custom view if you wanted to do something like put an image inside of each row of your list view, stuff like that. You can create your own custom views for each row in your list view. which is kind of cool to do sometimes. But in this case, we're just going to use this this view that Android has built in for us. And then finally, the last parameter to the array adapter constructor is our array list of items that we just retrieved from the database. So we pass that in as the last parameter. And then we take our list view and we have to specify the adapter for it. So we call set adapter and then pass in the adapter that we just set up. And that is it for our onCreate statement. So that sets everything up. So basically it just initializes all of our variables and pulls all the items out of the items table in our database, and then sets up an adapter and sets the adapter on the list view, and at that point we should see our data. Now here is the method that gets called when they click on the button. Remember, back from the layout, we said the onClick attribute of the button is set to add new item. So we've seen this code before. It takes a view. We're not going to use it in this case, but what we want to do is extract whatever they enter into the text box that's in the top of the layout. So here we're getting a handle on that text box, or the edit text, I guess I should say. I always call them text boxes. And so we get a handle on it here, and then we pull the value out of it. So if you've entered something into that edit text, we're getting it now, and we're assigning it to the string called item name. And then what we're doing here is we're going to say if it's not empty, then we'll insert it into the database. And if they press the button without entering anything on that edit view, what they'll see is a toast message that just says you must enter an item name. So that's a little bit of validation code right here, but let's just assume that they did enter a name. So what we're calling is the insert item method of our data access class, and we pass in a brand new item, and so we're actually wrapping up our constructor right here into this method call. But anyways, here's our constructor for a brand new item right here. And we just set the ID to 0. We can just set it to 0 because we know that the database will give it its real ID after it inserts the row. And then we also pass in the item name that they entered into the text box from up here. Okay, so after we do that, our list will not refresh. We have to do some manual refreshing of our list right here. So I've got a method that we'll take a look at in just a second here. It's called refresh items. And then finally what I wanted to do is clear out the edit text. So whatever they entered is going to get it's going to clear out that edit text at the top of the layout as soon as we insert a new item. All right, let's check out this refresh items method right here, and we are almost done. So here it is, public void refresh items. So what we're doing here is we're getting a hold of the adapter that we set on our list view. So here's my handle on my list view, and then I'm saying calling the get adapter method of it, and we know that that's an array adapter that takes item objects, so we have to actually do this cast right here, and that will give us our adapter. And then once we have the adapter, we clear it out. So we clear all the items out right here, and then we're actually going to get all of our items from the database again. So remember I've got my array list of items. That's the items variable here. I'm going to set that equal to DA, our data access, dot get all items. So that will retrieve all of our items from the database. And then I'm going to take all those items and add them to the adapter. So I clear the adapter out, get all the items from the database, and then add all those items back to the adapter. And then the last thing we have to do is call this notify dataset changed, and at that point call that on the adapter, and at that point our list will be refreshed with the latest data. Okay, that's it. You don't have to worry about this method down here because that just came with, that's some of the stock code that gets created for you. I think that's everything. I'm going to pause it for a second. There is one more thing I do want to show you. All right, so after waiting for what seemed like an eternity, my emulator is up and running, and here's our app. And I've got the cursor right here in our edit text view. So I'm going to go ahead and enter some item here. That's going to be the item name. And then I'll go ahead and click the add button. So remember that when I do this, it's going to insert the item into the database, get an ID back for that item, and then it's going to refresh our list view, which is empty right now. So I'll go ahead. There we go. So it seems to be working. And remember, now we didn't do anything fancy to our list view, so each item in the list view is calling that toString method on the item, which is why it appears like this. So the way I set it up is that toString method is going to return the item name and then concatenate the ID in parentheses into that. So you can check out that toString method if you want to see exactly how that works. And notice that we never actually called toString anywhere. Android, the operating system, calls it when it hooks up that adapter to the list view. So that looks like everything's working right now. I'll add one more item. Another item. Just call it another here. So there it is. Looks like everything's working. There is one more thing I want to show you which can be really helpful. If you make a mistake in any of those SQL commands, like especially the one where you actually create the table, you might run into some problems and you might wish you could delete the database file. Well, I want to show you how you can do that. So I'm going to go over to Android Studio here, and we've seen the DDMS perspective before. It's called something different in Android Studio. It was called DDMS in Eclipse, but if I go to Tools here, and then Android, and then choose the Android Device Monitor. Now this used to be called the DDMS, but apparently it's just called Android Device Monitor now. But if I go ahead and launch that, this will, we've seen this before when we were simulating text messages. So we used it to kind of send fake text messages into our phone. This will probably take a minute to fire up. But let's see. Well, I guess I'll pause it while that's happening. Okay. Am I recording? Yes. Okay, so here is that DDMS view right here. And so here's our emulator that I have running. I only have one emulator running. I could have multiple ones running, and I'd see them here. So I'm just going to click on this one, and then I'm going to go to the File Explorer tab over here. And so this shows me all the files that are on the phone. And all the applications get put into this data folder, and then into another data folder inside that data folder. And you can see here, these are all the apps that are installed on my phone. So I'm going to scroll down to the one that we just created, which is SQLite Example. Where is that? And I'm not seeing it right now, but it should be here somewhere. Oh, here it is right up at the top. So if I tip open that folder, I can see that there's a databases folder, and now there will be two files. One is just kind of keeps track of all the versions, that's the journal, but the database itself is right here, and now that's the name that we specified when we set up our when we extended the SQLite helper class. So what I can do here is I can actually take this and move it onto my desktop. So I'm going to click this button for our database, and then over here there's a button that says pull file from the device. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to say where do you want to put the file, and I'm just going to put it right on my desktop right here, and that's going to replace an older version that I already have. And then what you can do, now I'm not sure if anybody's interested in this or not, but if you want to actually get a good look at that database using an actual database tool, is there is a plugin for Firefox that you can use to look at, to mess around with SQLite databases. So I'll show you that right now. So what you do to get that up and running, I'm going to move over to Firefox here. Waiting. Nothing's fast with Android development, it seems like. Even Firefox is taking a long time. I've got my recording software is running too, which is a resource hog. So I'm bogged down between Android Studio and Camtasia, which is what I use to make these videos. But okay, so once Firefox is open, you can click over here on the hamburger icon, and I've already got it installed right here. It's a plugin called SQLite Manager, but what you can do to find it is you go to add-ons here, click the add-ons button, and you can do a search for, it's called SQLite Manager, and then it should show up in the list. Mine's already installed, so you can see it right here. But then what you need to do is, I had some trouble trying to figure out how to actually get to it, but what you would do is you would install it here, and then you'll have to restart Firefox. It'll actually prompt you to restart it for you. And then once you get it restarted, you can click right up here in the toolbar and choose Customize. And then what you do is you should see it over in your list right here, and you can just drag it into this spot onto your menu. So, whoops. So mine's not appearing in this list because I've already dragged it on here, but you can just drag it and drop it over here to the right. And then if you want to use it, I'm just going to close this now. To use it, you can click on the hamburger menu, I think. Or maybe not. Let me try it again from this tab. Okay, so you click on the menu, and then there's your SQLite Manager right here. So click on that. And now I'll just open it. Right, you usually don't see that prompt, but what you can do is, now you won't see anything. This is still remembering what file I had open the last time I used this manager plugin, but you can click the folder here to open a database file, and then browse to the database file. So let's see if I can find it here. I put it on my desktop, and I don't see it, but let me just type it in here. So for some reason I'm not seeing it here, but if I type it in, I can get to it. So I type in test.db, that's our database file, and then hit open over here. And you can see that now Android creates some tables in the database for you. That's what this is over here. And then there's SQLite actually has I think this is what it might be using. I'm not sure. This is a built-in table, but here's our items table right here. And you can see here are my items, some item and another item. And if I wanted to, I could actually populate I could add items here. You can run a bunch of SQL queries against this. So it's kind of nice to be able to look at this in an actual database manager. And then if I wanted to, I could move this back onto the device if I wanted to make some changes. But what you might want to do is if you mess up and you need to if you want to just delete the database altogether, you can do that back in your DDMS perspective. You could actually delete the file. So you could pick both these files right here, and then hit the minus sign, and that would delete it. So if you accidentally make a mistake in your create table statement, and then things won't work after that, you might decide that you need to blast the database. So you want to open up the DDMS perspective and then delete these two files. All right, I think that's it. A little long-winded, but I think I saved you some time by not making you go through chapters 11 and 12 because they are long. All right, go ahead and set up this project, and let me know if you have any problems. Thank you.